I don't remember a time in my life when I didn't know God. I learned about him early, growing up in a Christian family. My parents were church planting missionaries in central Maine. There were many mouths to feed, and God provided generously to meet our needs, sometimes even at the last minute. When my father passed away in 2006, a family photo appeared that allowed me to peek into my past. I want to share it with you because it helps to define who God made me to be. I'm the 2-year-old, blonde, pressing into my father, making sure I wasn't overlooked. With 8 of us at the time, I expect that being overlooked came with the territory. I was told, however, that one day my 10-year-old brother came home from school and said, "How come Sharon is 2 and we have to do what she tells us?" I assumed that meant that I was bossy. Later, I uncovered another photograph that my dad had sent to some relatives, and on the back it said, "Sharon, age 7, boss of the roost, at home and at school. Poor teachers." Poor teachers indeed. It's probably no surprise that I grew up to become a teacher, and I'm pretty sure that God has a sense of humor because everything I inflicted on my own teachers came back to me through my students. While in high school, I had learned the comfort of taking my concerns to God. I did a lot of prayer journaling, and that served me well throughout my life, knowing that He could guide my steps. The bulk of my teaching career was spent in Alexandria, Virginia, where I lived with my husband John, who worked for the government. It was during that season of life that I found and attended a small church in Lorton, Virginia, and eventually God would lead Dan and Marge Hopkins to serve there alongside us. We truly had a journey, a learning journey together. Marge and I served teaching Sunday school and in the women's ministry, while Dan taught and many spiritual truths and untaught lots of misguided information that we had received. As God blessed our congregation over the years, I remember reaching a point where I said, "This is my home. I want to stay here forever. This is where I want to retire, grow old, and die." It's not that I wanted to die, but I really loved my life. I loved being a teacher, and I loved the people that God had put in my community. I've heard it said that God has blessed us with the gift of time so that we don't know what the future will hold. And that certainly has to be true. We know that God is sovereign and He doesn't make mistakes, and we can trust Him with whatever happens, but it's best not to know it before the time comes. In 2008, my husband developed lymphoma, and while he fought a hard battle and it was a long journey, he lost the battle at the age of 67. I was 53. It came as such a shock to me how deeply painful that experience was. I was actually surprised that nobody had ever told me about that before. Grief was just raw and ravaging, and it really set me back. I wasn't alone, and God took care of me. My mother especially, I remember her telling me to just press into the Father, just somewhat like I did when I was 2. But God is faithful. He didn't leave me without comfort, and I know that He often uses the hard things in life to prepare us for what He wants us to do next. And I spent a couple of years facilitating in a grief share program At the next church I attended, I feel as though God used that experience to give me a real empathy for anybody who's waking up to that same shocking surprise that I had. Turn the page. I am going to fast forward and say that I didn't stay widowed and alone forever. I met my husband on eHarmony. He lived in Baltimore, and so when we married at my home, Dan and Marge attended in a very small ceremony. When we remarried, I moved to Baltimore. And during that first year while he worked and I was retired, I sat home a lot alone, just really contemplating what was it that God had for me next. He eventually gave us there's a car coming. He eventually led us to find a fellowship group in our church that was tailor-made for us. And that was one of the richest experiences that we had together as a newlywed couple. Those friends stay with us even still, though we chose to move to Maine and leave them behind. Today we live in our summer house in Maine, where God has given us a blank slate to be used for Him. And we don't know what that is going to look like yet. My mother's here, and I'm loving the time that He's given me to spend with her and to help her in ways that she's not able to do anymore. If my life was a hockey game, I would say that I'm entering the third period. The years ahead are known only to God, but I'm eager to follow His lead.